you know what this is all about? Do you know why we're here? Time travel. People talk about time travel, but nobody's doing anything about it. I think the worst are the time travel knock-knock jokes. Knock-knock. Who is it? A time traveler. A time traveler who? Knock-knock. The past, the present, and the future go into a bar. They're all tense. I was going to tell you people a time travel joke, but you guys didn't like it. Hello, my name is Matteo Noce, and this is a podcast about time travel. So join me in the place all of us are going to live, the future. It is uncertain if time travel to the past is physically possible, but that doesn't stop a lot of people from thinking about the possibilities. Forward time travel outside the usual sense of the perception of time is an extensively observed phenomenon and well understood within the framework of special relativity and general relativity. That said, making one body advance or delay more than a few milliseconds compared to another body is not feasible with current technology. As for backward time travel, it's possible to find solutions in general relativity that allow for it, such as a rotating black hole. Traveling to an arbitrary point in space-time has very limited support in theoretical physics, and usually is only connected with quantum mechanics and wormholes, also known as Einstein-Rosen bridges. Some theories suggest that suitable geometries of space-time or specific types of motion in space might allow for time travel into the past and the future if these geometries or motions were possible. Physicists discuss the possibility of closed time-like curves, which are world lines that form closed loops in space-time, allowing objects to return to their own past. There are known to be solutions to these equations in general relativity that describe space-time which contain closed time-like curves, such as Gödel's space-time, but the physical plausibility of these solutions is uncertain. Many in the scientific community believe that backwards time travel is highly unlikely. Any theory that would allow time travel would introduce potential problems of causality. The classic example of a problem involving causality is the grandfather paradox. The grandfather paradox is a paradox of time travel in which inconsistencies emerge through changing the past. The name comes from the paradox's common description. A person travels to the past and kills their own grandfather before the conception of their mother or father, which prevents the time traveler's existence. Despite the title, the grandfather paradox does not exclusively regard the contradiction of killing one's own grandfather to prevent one's birth. Rather, the paradox regards any action that alters the past, since there is a contradiction whenever the past becomes different from the way it was. Philosophers have discussed the nature of time since at least the time of ancient Greece. For example, Parmenides presented the view that time is an illusion. Centuries later, Isaac Newton supported the idea of absolute time, while his contemporary Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz maintained that time is only a relation between events and cannot be expressed independently. The latter approach eventually gave rise to the space-time of relativity. Many philosophers have argued that relativity implies eternalism, the idea that the past and the future exist in a real sense, not only as changes that have occurred or will occur to the present. Philosopher of science Dean Rickles disagrees with some qualification, but notes, "The consensus among philosophers seems to be that special and general relativity are incompatible with presentism." Some philosophers view time as a dimension equal to spatial dimensions, that future events are already there, in the same sense that different places exist, and that there is no objective flow of time. However, this view is disputed. In contrast, presentism is a school of philosophy that holds that the future and past exist only as changes that occurred or will occur to the present, and that they have no real existence of their own. In this view, time travel is impossible because there is no future or past to travel to. It's also been argued that even if past and future objects do not exist, there can still be definite truths about past and future events. Thus, it is possible that a future truth about a time traveler deciding to travel back to the present day could explain the time traveler's actual appearance in the present. The common objection to the idea of traveling back in time is put forth in the grandfather paradox, or the argument of auto-infanticide. If one were to go back in time, inconsistencies and contradictions would ensue if the time traveler were to change anything. There is a contradiction if the past becomes different from the way it is. Philosophers question whether these paradoxes make time travel impossible. Some philosophers answer the paradox by arguing that it might be the case that backward time travel could be possible, but that it would be impossible to actually change the past in any way. According to the philosophical theory of compossibility, what can happen in the context of time travel must be weighed against the context of everything relating to the situation. If the past is a certain way, it's not possible for it to be another way. What can happen when a time traveler visits the past is limited to what did happen in order to prevent logical contradictions. The Novikov self-consistency principle, named for Igor Novikov, states that any action taken by a time traveler or by an object that travels back in time were part of history all along, and therefore it is impossible for a time traveler to change history in any way. The time traveler's action may be the cause of events in their own past, though, which leads to the potential for circular causation, sometimes called a predestination paradox, ontological paradox, or bootstrap paradox. The term bootstrap paradox was popularized by Robert A. Heinlein's story, By His Bootstraps. Time travel themes in science fiction and the media can generally be grouped into three categories: immutable timeline, mutable timeline, and alternate histories, such as interreacting many worlds interpretations. Frequently in fiction, timeline is used to refer to all physical events in history, so that in timeline travel stories where events can be changed, the time traveler is described as creating a new or altered timeline. This usage is distinct from the use of the term timeline to refer to a type of chart that illustrates a particular series of events, and the concept is also distinct from a world line, a term from Einstein's theory of relativity which refers to the entire history of a single object. A temporal paradox, time paradox, or time travel paradox is a paradox, an apparent contradiction or logical contradiction associated with the idea of time and time travel. Other paradoxes associated with time travel are a variation of the Fermi paradox, and paradoxes of free will that stem from causal loops, such as Newcomb's paradox. A causal loop is a paradox of time travel that occurs when a future event is the cause of a past event, which in turn is the cause of a future event. Both events then exist in space-time, but their origin cannot be determined. A causal loop may involve an event, a person, or an object, or information. The absence of time travelers from the future is a variation of the Fermi paradox. The absence of extraterrestrial visits does not prove they do not exist, so the absence of time travelers fails to prove that time travel is physically impossible. It might be that time travel is physically possible, but never developed, or is cautiously used. Carl Sagan once suggested the possibility that time travelers could be here, but are disguising their existence, or are not recognized as time travelers. Some versions of general relativity suggest that time travel might only be possible in a region of space-time that is warped in a certain way, and hence time travelers would not be able to travel back to earlier regions in space-time before this region existed. Stephen Hawking stated that this would explain why the world has not already been overrun by tourists from the future. A possible resolution is that a time traveler can do anything that did happen, but can't do anything that didn't happen. Doing something that didn't happen results in a contradiction. The concept of time travel by mechanical means was popularized in H.G. Wells' 1895 story The Time Machine. In general, time travel stories focus on the consequences of traveling into the past, or the future. The central premise for these stories oftentimes involves changing history, either intentionally or by accident, and by the ways which altering the past changes the future and creates an altered present or future for the time traveler when they return home. Some stories focus solely on paradoxes and alternate timelines that come with time travel, rather than time traveling itself. They often provide some sort of social commentary, as time travel provides a necessary distancing effect that allows science fiction to address contemporary issues in metaphorical ways. Time travel in modern fiction sometimes is achieved by space and time warps, stemming from the scientific theory of general relativity, while stories from antiquity often featured time travel into the future through a time slip brought on by traveling or sleeping, or in other cases, time travel into the future or time travel into the past through supernatural means, for example, brought on by angels or spirits. The aforementioned Time Machine by H.G. Wells is generally credited with the popularization of the concept of time travel by using a vehicle or device to travel purposely and selectively forward or backwards through time. The term time machine was coined by Wells and now is almost universally used to refer to such a vehicle or device. In more modern science fiction, consider this passage from The Fall of Chronopolis by Barrington Bailey, a novel about a time war. Just after the detection of temporal invaders, we read, "They have come in from the future at high speed, too fast for defensive time blocks to be set up, and had only been detected by ground-based stations deep in historical territory. If the target was to alter past events, the usual strategy in a time war, then the Empire's chronocontinuity would be significantly altered with." And in The Time of the Fox by Matthew Costello, American physicists battled KGB physicists in a war of time travelers in the past, each side attempting to change history to its advantage. In this novel, the history changers isolate themselves from all alterations taking place outside of their time lab, and they compare their historical records with those of the external libraries. That allows the staff historian to adjust for each new round of changes. As the historian explains, outside the time lab, history might change, but here, the past lives on. There have been various accounts of persons who allegedly traveled through time, reported by the press or circulated on the internet. These reports have generally turned out to be either hoaxes or based on incorrect assumptions, incomplete information, or interpretation of fiction as fact, many now being recognized as urban legends. The time-traveling hipster became a study in a viral internet phenomenon. A photograph from 1941 of general authenticity of the reopening of the South Fork Bridge in Golden Gate, British Columbia, was alleged to show a time traveler. It is claimed that his clothing and sunglasses were of the present day and not of the styles worn in the 40s. Further research suggested that the present-day appearance of the man may not have been so new. The style of the sunglasses first appeared in the 1920s. On first glance, the man was taken by many to be wearing a printed t-shirt, but on closer inspection, it seems to be a sweater with a sewn-on emblem, the kind of clothing often worn by sports teams of the period. The shirt is very similar to one that was used by the Montreal Maroons, an ice hockey team from that era. The remainder of his clothing would appear to have been available at that time. The best one can say is his clothes were far more casual than those worn by the other individuals in the photograph. Hardly proof positive. The Philadelphia experiment is a name given to a military experiment which was supposedly carried out at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyards in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, sometime around October 28, 1943. It is alleged U.S. Navy destroyer escort USS Eldridge was to be rendered invisible or cloaked to enemy devices. The experiment was also referred to as Project Rainbow. Some reports allege that the warship traveled back in time about 10 seconds. However, with each retelling, the ship is said to take bigger and bigger time jumps. The story is widely regarded as a hoax. The U.S. Navy maintains that no such experiment occurred, and the details of the story contradict well-established facts about the Eldridge as well as the known laws of physics. But denials alone are hardly enough for some. In the same conspiratorial vein, the Montauk Project was alleged to be a series of secret United States government projects conducted at Camp Hero or Montauk Air Force Station in Montauk, Long Island, for the purpose of exotic research, including time travel. Stories about the Montauk Project have circulated since the early 1980s and has been described as an outgrowth of stories about the Philadelphia experiment. More recently, an online bulletin board user, self-identified as John Titor, became popular as he claimed to be a time traveler from 2036 on a military mission. Holding the many worlds interpretations as correct and consequently every time traveler paradox as impossible, he stated that many events that have occurred up to his time would indeed occur in this timeline. These included a devastating civil war in the U.S. in 2008, followed by a short nuclear World War III in 2015, which would kill 3 billion people. and the years following his last post and disappearance in 2001, the non-fulfillment of his specific predictions made his popularity decrease. Criticism has pointed out flaws in Teitur's stories, and investigations suggest his character may have been a host and creation of two siblings from Florida. Always Florida. The story has been retold on numerous websites, books, and in a play. He was also discussed occasionally on the radio show Coast to Coast AM, no doubt adding fuel to the fire. In this respect, the Teitur story may be unique in terms of broad appeal from an originally limited medium, an internet discussion board. It may be that time travel is very expensive, difficult, or dangerous, or for some other reason quite rare, and that by the time that it's available, our present period of history is insufficiently high on the list of interesting destinations. My conclusion is not that time travel is impossible, but that we should treat it the way we treat the possibility of tossing a coin and getting heads 1,000 times in a row. It could happen, but it ain't likely. I hope you all enjoyed our little trip through time. I'll sign off by saying, I'll see you all in the future, because that's where we're all going to live. This is Matteo Noce. The bartender says, sorry, we don't serve time travelers. Two time travelers walk into a bar. Have you heard this? Have you seen this one? Where do time travelers live? In the space-time condominium. Thank you. You've been a great audience.